This is TWiT.
There is a report in Mac Rumors and also available in some other places based on some YouTube channels that are claiming that the base 13-inch MacBook Pro, so this is the new MacBook Pro with the M2 chip, so old chassis, new chip, has significantly slower, quote, significantly slower SSD read and write speeds than the 13-inch MacBook Pro with M1 chip of yesteryear. So can we talk about this? What is going on here?
Yes.
Why are the read speeds slower? And should everyone just throw out their M2 MacBook Pros and wait for the next model?
Yeah, so I mean, like, a couple quick things. Like, one, it's become normal to catastrophize any new product launch from any major vendor. Like, there's just like 18 YouTube videos saying how terrible and broken it is at launch. And I feel for consumers because it's a lot of technical information and it's really hard to sort of muddle through it. In this specific case, the basic version, so there's NAND flash chips. That's what the storage really is. They're just chips. They're not actual drives anymore. And over time, it becomes more expensive to make the older, smaller versions of those. So that's why you get a natural progression, you know, from 32 gigabytes to 64 gigabytes to 128 gigabytes. You'd think that the smaller ones are always cheaper, but whatever they mass produce is always cheaper. So with the M2 MacBook Pro, Apple moved the base model from 128 gigabytes NAND flash chips to 256 gigabyte chips, because my understanding is that's what is being mass produced now. That is the one that they could get and ship in a timely and non-price destructive manner. So they just put the single slot in there. The downside for that is that you lose parallelism. When you have two of the chips, in many cases, they can both work at the same time. It's like having a scary RAID. You're just reading and writing to both of them simultaneously. Now, it's only the 256 gigabyte model. People are reacting as though Tim Cook came to their house and slapped them. It's just that model, which most people aren't buying. Like, most people, when you ask them which one they're buying, it's not that one, but they're still super angry. And it's also not something that you would notice in many situations. The way Apple does it is they have a minimum spec for any part. And that's like saying, in order to be on the Apple Olympic team, you have to run the 100-meter dash in 10 seconds. They don't care if you run it in 9.9, 9.8, or 9.7, but you better run it in 10 seconds. And then they'll just pick the team members, and some are faster and some are slower. And we saw this with, like, TSMC A9 chips being slightly faster than, or slightly better battery life than the Samsung fabbed ones. Or we also saw, like, some LG screens have been better than Samsung screens. The Qualcomm modems were better than Intel modems, and people would try to figure out which one they had in their phone. So there's always some, when you start multi-sourcing components or doing different configurations of components, you can often run into certain specs that are less performant than others. But for the vast majority of things, like, if you have a super ultra high speed NVMe Samsung X2 drive that you're copying back and forth from, it will copy back and forth in single and not in parallel, and you will notice like the speed is basically halved. But if you're doing almost anything else, if you're buying the baseline model, my guess is you'll have minimal to no, like 90% of people wouldn't even notice the difference.
So just confirming then, this is, because sometimes I think you have that situation where you have these people who are quickly testing these things and looking for, as you said, the headline feature.
Gotcha.
And sometimes there's inaccuracy, right?
Yeah.
But this, as far as you know, is an accurate representation. It's
Yes.
just that you feel that people will not probably notice this in their use of the device.
It's accurate, but they've lacked a lot of context. Like if you tell somebody very specifically which model it affects, that's more helpful than people just because my YouTube comments are filled down with people who think that every model is broken and the entire machine should be melted down, which is never good, because some people really want this machine and they shouldn't be made to feel like educate them, please educate them, but don't terrify them.
Right, educate, don't terrify. I think that's a fair estimation. Andy, what are your general thoughts on this as well? Because I think these. I've always appreciated it. So I, for folks who don't know, I produce this show each week, which means watching it while everybody's talking and sort of figuring out what stories go where. And so I have a pretty good line of kind of everybody's the things on which they focus. And Andy, I do feel like you have a good focus on folks who maybe don't have as big of a budget as others, and the folks who are stepping into, and I don't mean that you yourself don't have a big budget, but I just think you're very mindful of the entire audience is what I'm saying. So I just was curious about your thoughts on this in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rene has a great point that there is a difference between information and understanding. And one of the liabilities and one of the defects of a lot of reviewers and a lot of people who write about tech, myself included, is that we're just excited to find out something that is interesting or not necessarily the first thing you'd think of. And when you find out that, ooh, well, geez, I wonder why the performance of the storage is not as high as this other thing. There has to be. I wonder if Apple isn't getting the golden chips, the golden DRAMs from the assembly line. And the thing is, at some point, you have to back off and say, well, how much is this going to affect the consumer? And definitely talk about it because it's news, it's something interesting, and will help people understand how these things are put together and how a MacBook gets the performance that they're supposed to get. But at the end of the day, how is it going to limit what you can do with this 2022 MacBook Pro? How does it make it a problematic device? And the answer is, well, no, it doesn't make it problematic at all. If you can, I don't think that one of the best pieces of advice that I can give anybody, and sometimes I have to remind myself of it when I'm a consumer, is that you don't choose to spend money based on a chart, based on a graph. You do it based on what is going to be the experience of using this day to day, hour to hour, and honestly, the sensitive when I'm looking at a MacBook, the state of the keyboard, how does the keyboard feel? Are the ports where they should be, or am I always going to be pulling out a power cable? Does the screen look absolutely wonderful? How much of a pain in the butt is it going to be? That's going to be a bigger effect than simply this benchmark by this very, very smart, very, very technically assured and very, very competent tester tells me that the RAM on this model is not going to be as good as the RAM on this other model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's well put. I
will also say that as the owner of a 2020 MacBook, 2020 MacBook, maybe it's not an antique. I'm sorry. I mean, well, that's why I left. That's why I left at the start. It's like for owners of. Sorry.
I think that for the folks that would need the drive space to be a lot faster. I don't think they'd be using the 13-inch, to be honest. I think that they'd be using the 16 because if you're doing heavy video, the 13-inch is too small. It's too small to work. I own the 13-inch or 14-inch, and it's too small to do like the kind of things that you'd be doing lots and lots of heavy video. I think that you'd probably end up. So I think that especially folks that would buy a 256. I don't think they'd ever know unless they read this article that it was going slow. And I just mean that in a way that it is, it's the target audience is different. And as soon as you add one more, as soon as you go to 512, I think it works fine. And I recommend getting a small drive, but I would never recommend getting a 256 at this point. You'll have all kinds of problems at that storage size. So I don't even know if I think to meet a minimum cost that they can put on the website, they have a 256 version, but I would highly recommend not doing that.
And for thin clients for enterprise, because the lower end MacBooks are the ones that they buy just to use all their web apps and junk like that.
Yeah,
but to Alex's point, if you can only do single channel on the NAND at 256, just go to 512. I know I love spending Tim Cook's money as much as the next person, but it's 2022. Just go to 512. Everyone will love you and make it up on the higher end. Make it up on the Mac Mini that Alex is going to buy 23 of next fall.
I know. That's true across the board. Even on the phones, one of the deciding factors for me between when I had $1,000 to spend on a top tier phone last year, and I did wind up with a Pixel 6 Pro instead of a new iPhone. I really did seriously consider switching back to iPhone because I think they're both super excellent devices, very, very in tune to my needs. And what it came down to is that I could get 512 gigabytes of storage. Twice as much as the iPhone for the exact same amount of money, and with everything else in my book was so close that I would much rather have the double the storage. I really think that's across the board. Apple maybe should consider, again, it's great to spend Tim Cook's money like this, but that's you can't when storage is soldered onto the board and is not replaceable by any hand other than the hand of God itself. Wow, that could be an important deciding factor.